Hey, what's up, guys? My name is Nate, and this is going to be the first episode of a podcast that I am going to tentatively call Thinking It Through, unless I get copyright striked or something. Yeah, welcome to my podcast slash YouTube show. In this show, I'm going to talk over a bunch of issues that I would consider popular issues, but also very complex issues that I think that maybe a lot of people don't spend enough time thinking about and enough time diving into before they draw a conclusion and decide, how that conclusion is going to guide their actions and the way that they approach certain issues. So I'm excited to do this podcast. I am going to have some guests on from time to time. I'm guessing I'm going to have to just start posting solo videos for a while until I get some interest, and then I'd love to start having conversations with people. Today, the first episode is going to be about who deserves money. Well, this might seem like a simple question on the face of it, especially if you already have pre-drawn conclusions about the way our economic system should work. And you may already be drawing some conclusions about where you think I'm going to go with this, but I promise you probably don't know. The first thing that I think that I should distinguish between on why that I want to approach this issue obviously is going to be capitalism and the role that that plays in an economy and how it plays out at large, but also how it plays out in our individual lives. I was actually listening to another podcast by Andrew Yang, and they were talking a little bit about nonprofit directors, and they brought up a short example about the salary of a nonprofit director and stuff like that. And so that's what really brought this concept at large into my mind. So I'm going to start there and just branch out a little bit. So just to preface this, I actually do run my own nonprofit called Utah Approves. We're focused on passing approval voting in the state of Utah. And currently, I don't make any money off it. I do it just full-time volunteer. It's something that I care a lot about, and so as of right now, I don't really mind not making money off it because I've had another job and I've been able to sustain myself so far. Um, Eventually, I do want to start making a modest salary through this nonprofit. However, I've been battling with these internal issues of like how much should I make, how much is fair to take out of the overall pool of donations that we've been receiving and stuff like that. It's a very complex issue, and I think for a very good reason. In that podcast I was listening from Andrew Yang, they actually mentioned probably the biggest thing that creates concern for people in this space, which is that when you're donating to a nonprofit, you want that money to go towards the cause and achieving the cause and the mission of the organization. You don't want to be padding the pockets of the people who are running that organization, right? You're assuming that the people running those organizations are already in a decent spot and that they don't really need financial support. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't be doing something to help other people. And so when you give money to that organization, you want it all to go towards what the mission of that organization is. So, for example, if you give to a food pantry, you want it to go towards buying food and programs that do outreach to people who need that food. Um, but I wanted to kind of push this thought a little bit further because I do think that nonprofit directors and employees actually deserve a good amount of money, and there's a few reasons for this. So the first one that I want to mention is that um, when an organization is being run, it takes a lot of time and effort and attention to do so. And there's this assumption that people who are running this organization should be well off already. But I think that's a terrible assumption that we have in society, that anybody who's running a nonprofit should have already made it through their own personal success through business and stuff like that. And so what I think is that we should leave the nonprofit sector open to anybody who wants to participate in it. I don't have a lot of wealth. I don't really have any wealth. I don't make that much money, and I've actually just quit my part-time job so that I can full-time focus on this organization, which is why I've been starting to think about what kind of salary to afford myself. Through the nonprofits fundraising efforts and et cetera. So there's this big question which I want you guys to think about, which is how much money should people have just to be good, just to be set to live and feel comfortable and feel like they do have some energy to give back. I think that there's two separate dynamics that may be understood in this space. One of them is the one I just mentioned, where it's like you've already made it, you've been going through a business, you have achieved a lot through that business, and you have a certain amount of personal fortune that you're able to live off, or maybe just passive income that's coming in from your previous efforts, and now you're able to focus on something that you want. But I don't think that focusing on something that you want should be left up to the point in your life where you've already done something that you didn't want to do, or been forced to focus on something that maybe is still interesting to you, but isn't, if you had to choose one thing that you would have focused on. And so, for that reason, I do think that, again, if somebody wants to focus on something that's going to benefit other people, they should be able to do so and still be benefited themselves while they're going through that effort. Again, I may seem biased on this situation because it's the situation that I'm currently living through. But even if I wasn't running a nonprofit, I think that these would be my thoughts, and thoughts that led to my opinion on this were definitely forming before I ever decided to run a nonprofit myself. Um, so it was mentioned to me the other day, actually by my brother, that there was a study done that showed um, that nonprofits that spend about 40% of the money that they fundraised and got through donations and grants or whatever, if that about 40% was spent on overhead, those nonprofits actually achieved their mission more often and did better on their mission more of the time. And I think the main reason for that is because, again, people need to be supported so that they can do something. It doesn't have to come from a previous time of life. It can just be a continuous support. So if you're making a couple $1,000s a month even, that's enough support to live on for most people, and maybe even have a couple of nice things that they can buy a month or go on a vacation or two a year or something like that, which I think everyone should be afforded to do. Um, when people are in a good state of mind and they feel financially secure, all of their focus is able to be turned to what they're doing and the effort that they want to be putting in. So I think that's one of the main reasons that nonprofit directors do deserve a decent salary. Now, obviously, I think there could obviously be limits on this. I know there was like the Boys and Girls Club director was afforded a salary of like $1 million a few years ago, and there was a huge news story about this, and they ended up either getting fired or deciding to step down from that organization because of that. And granted, that might be too much money. $1 million is quite a bit. I don't think really anybody needs $1 million. But this actually leads me to the broader topic that I think is underlying this discussion, which is, again, who deserves money? When we look at the way that capitalism is set up, people who get money I mean, originally it was supposed to be people who are giving value to society. If you bring value to society, then you deserve more value, or in other words, you deserve more power to continuously bring more value to society. I think that was the original philosophical idea of capitalism, other than just the practical function of it. I mean, I do think that capitalism works better than any other economic system that we've discovered so far. I mean, if you look at communism and anything like that, it ultimately doesn't work. And maybe that's for another podcast topic, but I do think that giving people a personal incentive to do something that brings value to society is a great idea. I personally don't believe in the idea of free will. And the way that connects to this conversation is that if you don't have free will, then maybe you're not the one that's responsible for bringing the value to society. But regardless of whether or not you believe in free will, it's undeniable that motivation from your environment, such as gaining more money to add value to society, is prevalent. And so when that, is around and you have the possibility to have that incentive where you think that you can live a better life and that you can get nicer things or move up in society, that's a motivator to try to do something that's beneficial for society. So the idea of capitalism in that respect is a great idea, I think. But the as we have seen, especially over the past few decades in the tech industry, as that has emerged, we have started to see that this idea, while good at the start, doesn't always play out like that. So I think that someone like Jeff Bezos is a perfect example because he has created a service, Amazon, which is great for society. I do think that this is part of the future. It's something that we should have moved towards, and I think that we should continue to move towards, where we have a place that we can go online and it's really easy to shop for anything you need and get it delivered to your door in a short amount of time. Like, that's all great. And there's definitely a conversation to be had about how that exploits workers and the warehouse and the drivers and stuff like that. It's my personal opinion that something like automation will eventually replace those issues, and I do think that's something that we should move towards. But again, that's another thing for another time. Um, but the problem is that when someone like Jeff Bezos starts to accumulate as much wealth as he has, does he really deserve that much money? Does this company really deserve that much power over our society simply because it's providing such a valuable service? And I think the answer to that is obviously no, and I don't think many people would disagree with that. Um, there's a conversation to be had over, the personal accumulation of wealth. I mean, $100 billion, and most of that's tied up in his stock prices, but that's so much money. I mean, nobody will ever be able to spend that much money in their life. I mean, even someone like Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk who are starting their own space companies, like, they're not going to spend $100 billion of personal wealth in those pursuits. I don't think that's necessary at all, but I also don't think it's necessarily bad to allow people to accumulate that much wealth because in the grand scheme of things, there's trillions and trillions of dollars in our economy. Even 100 billion is kind of minuscule in the light of that. Um, so the question becomes, like, why do we have so much wealth inequality? And a lot of people point the finger at these people who have large personal riches, but I think the real answer is their companies. Their companies are the ones that are tying up so much money and getting massive, massive amounts of revenue. I mean, there's so much money flowing through these companies on a yearly basis, and that means that gives them the power to decide where that money goes and what they spend it on, and basically to decide what direction our society goes, simply because they've created one thing that's valuable in our society. And that's the part that I want to get at. I don't think that's correct. Um, I think, and going back to the nonprofit thing, I think that somebody who runs a super valuable nonprofit who is actually bringing a huge value to society deserves more money. They deserve more influence in their organization than something like Amazon does. I mean, Amazon is ultimately a business. It's not. Um, I mean, it's there that it's providing a great value to society, but that's not its main goal. Its main goal is to enrich its shareholders, and I think that's fine for a business to have as its goal. I mean, I think that's what again drives business, and it's there to incentivize. Um, but the problem is that the nonprofit industry does not have as big of an incentive as business, and so you have a lot of great minds that aren't going into nonprofits because they just don't have the incentive to do so. One of the biggest industries right now that's sucking up all of the great minds that are coming up is finance, simply because the biggest way, if you want to make your billion, is to go into finance. Most of the billionaires in America came out of the finance company. It wasn't even the tech industry. And so I think there's a huge problem there where a lot of our very intelligent and well-meaning individuals are just following the money, following the incentives, because that's how we have our society set up. And again, I don't think that's a bad thing, but what I do think is a bad thing is where those incentives are directing people. And so I want to propose that I think we should be more accepting of somebody having a high salary in a nonprofit, somebody accumulating billions of dollars from the nonprofit industry, as long as their company is continuing to add a great value to society. And so obviously this idea is kind of counterintuitive because, again, going back to what I said at the very beginning, is that people feel like if they're donating to a nonprofit, they want their money to go to something that's valuable. But again, if we have this very compelling study that shows that 40% of fundraising and donations is being spent on overhead, meaning the people who are running the organization actually causes a more successful operation, we should be following that data to the end and saying, well, yeah, I mean, if a nonprofit is drawing in, $100 million, I don't think it's necessarily bad that 40 million of that goes to people in that organization who are helping run and accomplish that mission, because a nonprofit should ultimately be bringing more value than even a company like Amazon or Tesla or something like that is actually bringing to our society. And not only that, but they are incentivized to continue to bring value, not to just continue to raise shareholder value in that company. So again, I want to propose to you the idea of who deserves money. There's a great ancient Chinese word that was used in many ancient Chinese philosophers' studies and their books and their philosophies called "de." When translated to English, it's spelled "de." So, what does "de" mean? Well, essentially, they believed that people who were leaders, that those people were innately endowed with deep morality and ability to bring value to society, and that's why they ended up in leadership positions with great power. I think that this was a really intriguing idea, not because it was true. I mean, if you look at Chinese history, you know that's not true because there were plenty of people who ended up in power who did disastrous things and destroyed their society or became very selfish. But if you take this idea and you just reverse engineer it and say, well, should the people who are bringing the most value to society, should they be given the most power and the most money in our society is one of the biggest things that gives us power? I think the answer is clearly yes. And I don't think that that's a bad thing. I think that, again, if somebody is bringing value to society, they should be given power to do more of that, rather than somebody who is bringing a value to society only to enrich themselves. They should not be given more power. They should simply, I think the roles of a nonprofit and business in our world should actually be reversed, where a business should be able to do what it's doing and bring a value to society. But if you're doing that for personal riches and to increase shareholder value, you shouldn't be given or allowed, I guess, to say, keep as much of that money as a nonprofit would. And we do have things set up in society where nonprofits obviously aren't taxed as much, but the issue is that large corporations are barely taxed either. Amazon effectively paid $0 in taxes over the past few years. And when I say $0 in taxes, what that essentially means is that they didn't pay anything at the end of the year because they were able to claim that most of their money was put back into their business. And I don't think that's right. Again, if you're building out your business, that's fine. But there should be, and I believe in what's called a value added tax, where you have a 10% tax on the point of purchase for every purchase made at Amazon that instantly goes towards benefiting society again, because these corporations are not encouraged to do that themselves. They're encouraged to build out their business, which again may be bringing some value to society, but that is not their main goal. Their main goal is to bring shareholder value, and their secondary goal is to bring a value to society that increases their shareholder value. Whereas something like a nonprofit, their main goal is to bring a value to society. And so there's no shareholders in a nonprofit, there's just the people who work there. And again, I think that those nonprofits, um, like I said, nonprofits are already set up not to be taxed, but there's this attitude towards nonprofits that we think that they don't deserve as much money and they don't deserve as much power in society, or at least that's how it's treated. And I don't think that's right. I don't know exactly what the solution would be to this. I mean, maybe some of that value added tax could go directly to certain nonprofits, or maybe you can decide, when you make a purchase, what nonprofit you want that money to go to. And again, this doesn't always have to this doesn't always have to go back to the individuals who are running the corporation, although I do think that they deserve some of that money. And I do think that if we're going to incentivize people, individuals, to do better, we may as well incentivize individuals who are doing something with the main goal in mind of increasing value in society, which I think is what a nonprofit does. And so even if you are a nonprofit director and you have this in mind that you can make a lot of money from doing that, it's ultimately not as bad as a company doing that, because again, your main value is to bring value to society within the organization, and then the secondary goal from that is that you end up making money because you brought value to society. So it's switching that first and second priorities. Now, again, if there's a company or if there's a nonprofit that's bringing in $100 million, I don't think, a nonprofit director needs to make $10 million or something a year. I think anybody who is diving into the nonprofit sector understands, that there's really not much benefit in making that much money for yourself individually anyway. Um, but these are the people that should be given power through their organization and given status in society where they can make connections to other people that can continue to bring value to society. Um, I think there's less possibility of corruption in a nonprofit than there is a corporation, simply put. And of course, there's obviously going to be cases of people who are going to try to do this for their own benefit and try to increase it. But if you don't have that obligation of increasing shareholder value for the corporation and then increasing your own personal wealth, if you only have the idea of increasing your personal wealth and within the operation of the organization itself is just to increase value in society and that's what brings you money, I think that actually just makes a lot more sense. So um, that's pretty much my overview of this situation. When I first thought about this, I thought this seems backwards. It seems really weird to me that capitalism, the idea of it was that people who bring value should get to experience the better things. Yet right now, it's people who bring value to their shareholders get to experience better things, and I just don't think that really makes sense. Um, One of the hardest things to get around this issue is going to be changing consumer behavior. It's really hard because when you have a personal fund of money and you go out to the store and you think, well, this is my money, I want to spend it on something that benefits me, I earn this money. I don't think that's wrong, but that leads to all sorts of things like people buying unnecessary products and people buying, junk food or whatever it could be. Um, I just think that there needs to be some kind of reorganization of value in our society that says that, like, from somewhere directs more money to nonprofits because nonprofits aren't producing a product. They're not usually producing a service that they're charging a great deal for because again they are a nonprofit. Um, but I just am baffled by why people at the top are all people who got there through business. Why are none of the richest people in the world or none of the most powerful people in the world nonprofit directors? I mean, it's like either you come up through a corporation, or if you want to do something for people, you come up as a politician, and then because corporations are so prominent, they end up corrupting those politicians anyway, and nothing gets done, and we end up in a society as we do now that just doesn't really value true value. So, and again, I don't really know what the best solution to this would be. I think one thing is just changing the stigma that it's not okay for someone who's leading a nonprofit to take a hefty salary. I think that should be totally okay. If we're okay with someone like Jeff Bezos taking a hefty salary, then why shouldn't we be okay with somebody who's actually doing something out of the goodness of their heart to really provide for society, to make a lot of money as well and to live a nice life? Again, I do think there should be limits on that. I mean, there's studies that say that anybody who makes more than $60,000 a year doesn't get an increase in happiness. And I think that's something that's definitely should be considered. But, a nonprofit director should be able to afford a nice house and should be able to afford a nice car. And I don't think we should chastise them for buying a Ferrari after they've spent 10 years building up an organization that's provided so much good for society. So, um, that's just my 2 cents on the issue. I do think it's a very complicated issue. It gets right down to the roots of how our society and economy works, and so there's obviously going to be a lot of debate over this issue, but I really do think that we should be thinking about this and at least getting rid of that stigma, and then maybe doing something to um, direct some kind of money towards nonprofits every year that just encourages more people to go into the nonprofit industry because right now, there's not that much money in it for individuals, and it's also really hard to get money for your nonprofit itself because, again, people don't want to spend money on something that they don't see individually necessarily benefit themselves right away. So, yeah, I don't know. I would love to hear some thoughts on what people think a good solution for this is, but I just think this is a problem and it needs to be thought about a little more. So yeah, thanks guys for watching. Whoever is watching this very first episode, I do appreciate it. It's going to be you people that help me get off the ground. I have a lot of thoughts on a lot of issues. I'd love to continue to bring them to you. I'll go ahead and throw my Patreon link down in the description. If you are able to, please just throw a little bit of money my way. It would help me a lot with getting this off the ground, and I'd love to be able to do this part-time in addition to running my nonprofit, which currently I don't really make any money off of, so it would just go a long way in helping support me, and I would really appreciate it. I would always love to see feedback in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell, as I have heard that helps a lot with the YouTube algorithm. But yeah, thanks for checking out my first episode. I will try to get a couple of these up a week, and yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one.